From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. And now here's your host, Michael Fries.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. Before we dive into today's episode, we'd like to invite you to subscribe to Transport Topics, where you can receive exclusive access to our top 100 lists, quarterly magazines, and other news surrounding the trucking industry. To subscribe, visit ttn.ws/TT subscribe. You can also text TT subscribe to 571-622-0001 to become an official member of Transport Topics. That's 571-622-0001. In this episode, we will ask the simple question: how do you become a sustainable trucking business? As part of our Transport Topics RoadSigns workshop, we asked this question from a genuine expert of sustainability. As always with our workshops, we explore many of the industry's pressing issues and provide a process to help you, the listener, find a valuable solution. With a live Q&A, we allow our listeners to engage and walk away with answers and solutions to their business problems. In this episode, we'll give you a review of our latest how-to workshop that focuses on sustainability. This was a really great project to work on, and to get a better understanding of this question, we spoke with Craig Marris, co-founder of Cortex, a telematics company acquired by EROAD back in 2021. Let's take a listen.
Welcome to our RoadSigns workshop, where an industry expert shows you how to. I'm your host, Michael Fries, today, and for this workshop, we're going to discuss a term that's often thrown around in the industry, and that word is sustainability. For this RoadSigns workshop, how to be a sustainable trucking business, with help from our industry expert, we're going to break down sustainability and how the trucking business can achieve that in a more viable, measurable way. So for this task, we'd like to introduce Craig Marris. He is the Chief Sustainability Officer and the Executive Vice President, Transportation and Cold Chain at EROAD. Craig Marris, he is a New Zealander. He is from New Zealand, hails from the great country from there. He is the co-founder of Cortex. It's a telematics company that was acquired by EROAD back in 2021. Craig has been based in the United States since 2006, where he launched the company's North American operations. And he's been instrumental in launching Cortex's in-cab compliance solution back in 2009. As the Chief Sustainability Officer, he leads EROAD's external and internal sustainability initiatives. That's working with stakeholders across the legal, regulatory, and product development areas. He also has a double degree in marketing and economics from Ortega University, and he is also a graduate from the Harvard Business School of Analytics, graduating with this distinctions, mind you. So he's very well versed to talk about this today. So without further ado, welcome to the workshop, Mr. Marris.
Thanks, Michael. Real pleasure to be here.
No problem. Glad to have you on. Let's get ready to learn today. So before we get into that how-to, let's take it from the beginning. And first of all, how to be a sustainable trucking business. Powering America's truck fleets is a matter of economic and national security, and tasked with moving transports that's nearly 12 billion tons of freight annually. So that's about 72% of our economy's total tonnage. So that's a lot. So with that, we with more than 300 billion miles traveled each year, the trucking industry leads on vehicle emissions reductions and environmental sustainability. So over the last 3 decades, emissions from new trucks have been reduced by more than 98%. That's a lot. It would take about 60 of today's trucks to generate that same level of NOx emissions and soot emissions, coming from a single truck back in 1988. So this is a very important topic in the sense of our environment and the industry that we're in, that produces so much of these emissions, and the efforts to be more sustainable and to make the world more green. for that matter, and then that's where we talk about sustainability in that context, especially in this industry. And the people watching right now, they want to learn how to build that on scale practically. Just how do we go about that? And before we get into the first steps, there'll be three, not probably, there'll be three ways we'll get into this. We're going to learn how to track the emissions profile. We'll get into that a little bit later into this program. That's step one. Step two is going to be the planning and setting goals for your emissions profile. So we're going to know what emissions profile is. We're going to learn how to plan for that and set expectations. And then, of course, step number three, we're going to execute that plan, and we're going to continue to track that continuous improvement and all that. So we're really going to break this down. So we're going to try to make this as simple and clear as possible. And I think Craig will do a lovely job in that. But Craig, we definitely have some questions in that regard before we even start. Like, for instance, Douglas Graves, he has a question from Dunn and Bybee Tool and Company. I'm going to piggyback off of him, and we actually have a slide asking his question. What is sustainability, and why is it important to everyone? Before we get into all of that, let's tackle that. So, what is sustainability, Craig?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Sustainability in the trucking industry really sort of encompasses the practices and strategies aimed at reducing the environmental impact of freight transportation on one hand, but also ensuring economic viability and social responsibility. So if I was sort of double click into that a little bit, I really sort of see it as like 5 key elements, Mike. I think first of all, same as environmental sustainability. I mean, just simply put, that's just reducing your carbon footprint. And I know we'll be talking a little bit later in this workshop about the elements that we want to consider in that endeavor. The second one, economic sustainability. For a trucking company to sustain its operation, it's got to be profitable. So that's a really important factor. The social sustainability is really focusing on the human element, and so that's really encompassing the fair labour practices, safe working conditions for employees, and that's important. The other element to that is really the community outreach, supporting local communities, and I feel that the trucking industry does a really good job at that, and that is really part of the sustainability definition in my mind. And the final two parts, I would say, to that definition is really around resiliency and adaptability. So what I mean by resiliency is basically ensuring that you've got a trucking operation that can actually sustain issues where we've got major disruption, and we're going to see a lot more of this in the future. So how do I adapt my operations to have a sustainable business? So these are the key considerations, those 5 factors.
Okay. Out of those 5 things, the 2 points that captured me was the sense of community and resiliency, and that's one thing, especially in this industry. That's the resiliency, has definitely been shown like during the pandemic and how the industry moved forward during that time. And then the sense of community of just gathering around a particular topic or a particular sense that is very vital to the trucking industry. And one of them being, having, as you had mentioned, sustainability, leaving your carbon footprint, and reducing emissions and making the world around you more green. I think that's a good point to make, especially in the next point that we're going to make, which is getting to that first step of being sustainable, and that requires tracking your emissions profile. I mean, number one, is that similar to when you say establishing your carbon footprint? I mean, are those 2 different particular things? Could you explain that for us?
Yeah, no, they're related. And I would say that question around the optimal emissions profile, I mean, that's actually quite a complex question to answer, to be honest, because it really so many dependencies.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at factors such as the type of fuel, the vehicle type, of course, the operational practices, the type of load, the business you have. And so I wouldn't say there's like a universal profile saying, hey, this is the CO2. But I think the important point, because that will vary by industry, and that's pretty obvious. But I think the important point is setting the goal to move towards net zero, and I think that's the important thing. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the tools to help that profile. But that's really realistically, it's a depends.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I just wanted to, have some clarity into that, especially for our listeners who have that particular question. When you talk about, establishing a carbon footprint, and just the take away the confusion of all this. But let's kind of get back on track. And speaking of track, tracking your emissions profile. Now, what does that particularly look like?
Tracking your profile, a big part of tracking your profile is actually measuring that footprint. So, and that's the tools that I think we'll pick up a little bit later in this discussion about, what are those tools that will help me understand what my actual footprint is based on the type of operations I have. But one of the things I think that's critical is actually the benchmarking. Benchmarking's key, and there are really good programs such as the Smartway Transport Partnership, where fleets can actually use benchmark information kind of profiled to the way their organization's set up. Okay. And then that allows for them to come with practical steps of saying, first of all, I've got to understand, what is my profile today? How does that compare to other like vehicles? Is it, am I running an economic operation with that? And are there other initiatives that I can use, which absolutely there is in terms of decarbonisation, that lower my footprint, but at the same time, make sure that I'm running a really a viable business. And that's the key thing. You have to have those two things in equilibrium, or it can really affect the viability of business.
Now, I'm glad you brought up viability. It's just, as one size wouldn't necessarily fit all. The fleet owners and managers who are watching this, they are all. I mean, the only thing they have in common is they have trucks that transport goods and services. I mean, but on the other end, there's so many nuances involved in that. So, how can a person establish a profile that will be viable to them? I mean, is it just in the sense of, you're saying, how many pounds of CO2 should be emitted each year, per vehicle, per fleet? I mean, it's just, or those, and taking inventory on equipment, are those some of the factors that fleet owners and managers need to take into effect when they're establishing a profile?
Yeah, they do. So, I think there's great telematic tools. EROAD provides, insights to a fleet's operation team, and that's literally saying, what is my fuel emissions and my intensity. All right. So we have a number of reports, as well as other providers within the telematics, that actually give me those insights. So if I compare make, age, model, the routing configuration of that vehicle, how does it stand today? How does it compare versus other vehicles, either within the fleet? And now there's reports around comparison, comparing like for like outside of your fleet. Am I competitive with that profile? What insights do I get there? What decisions should I be making about how I could improve that? And a big part of it does flow into things like driver behavior and aerodynamic factors and so on. So yeah, you've got to get the data. It's all about getting access to that information. And fortunately, we can do that today. It's just a matter of unlocking the value of that data.
Hey, trucking pros, are you ready to lead the charge in sustainability? Join us for the exclusive RoadSigns workshop on becoming a greener, more sustainable fleet. Michael Freeze is joined by Craig Marris, Chief Sustainability Officer at EROAD, to discuss the latest industry trends, insights, and cutting-edge tech to reduce your carbon footprint. Watch the full video replay now at roadsigns.ttnews.com, and let's pave the road to a sustainable tomorrow.
You know, and of course, like you're definitely speaking about that viability in the sense of, what type of alternative fuels should I invest in? I mean, it's not a particular question that can be asked right now. Like you said, every one size doesn't fit all when it comes to becoming a sustainable fleet. So, yeah, I mean, in your opinion, just in investing in alternative fuels, what route should a fleet manager consider first? I mean, is there a particular correct answer to that?
Well, again, it's funny, it depends, right? So I think, what type of routes are you running? Are you doing local? Are you doing regional? Are you doing over the road? And so if you start with saying, hey, I'm doing local deliveries, thinking through the profile of that, they could be really good candidates for EVs, whereby range is not such a factor, but whereas a Class 8 over the road range is a big factor, right? So, and we're seeing different technology evolve pretty quickly, especially hydrogen on longer routes. And the fleet's now starting to, there's OEMs that's starting to get up to about 500 miles in range, as well as fill in 20 minutes. That's quite different to what it was probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So those local fleets, EV, and they're generally going to be lighter vehicles. So you're going to sort of see step vans, the drayage, hustlers. They are really good candidates for conversion. And so doing the calculus on that is super important, right? So if I can do that versus other fleets, and we'll talk a little bit later, I know, about, well, how do you actually get that data? Because you've got to you need to be able to do the analysis. You've got to simulate almost what that would look like, okay?
Oh, yeah, not a problem. And we will get to that. That you are referring to step 2. But as you see in the chart, the light duty vehicles, 58% of emissions by source from 2021, as you had stated, just sort of the candidates for EV conversion, alternative fuel conversion. That's the light duty vehicles that you were talking about, with last mile delivery and such. And fleets have been doing that. The bigger fleets have definitely been doing that. With UPS, that comes to mind, with the work that they have done with EVs in the metro areas for the last, I think 10 plus years. So you are definitely onto something, Craig. But yes, let's get to step 2. We have that emissions profile. We've done our research. And knowing what our emissions profile looks like, we looked at the variables of how we can go forth with that. But it's all about the planning and the setting the expectations and those goals for your emissions profile. And let's it's all about the why of that, of having an emissions profile. Why is that important, Craig?
Again, I mean, you've got to have a solid starting point to make pretty expensive decisions, right? To convert to an EV or hydrogen vehicle is not cheap. Now, fortunately, a lot of grants out there, but you need to research those. Also, there's planning permits that need to be put in place. But if you don't understand where you are today, it's really hard to simulate or forecast what you need for the future. And the thing is, if you're not looking at this closely, then your competitors are, I believe. And so I think if you establishing your baseline, if you will, and then having people within the organization that are looking at this really closely about what can we do today to reduce my carbon footprint. There is many things that we can do today that within your operations without even investing in EVs, right, or hydrogen or some alternative renewable fuel. And so dialing in on that is super critical. And I can talk through some examples of that at some point or now, if you like.
Oh, yeah, yes. Well, examples are always welcomed here. So, I definitely wanted to kind of add on. Well, I mean, just sort of I guess not add on, but just kind of follow up from what you were just saying, you know, and with business, there's a lot of risk involved. I mean, just going into business, that is a risk in itself. But what we're talking about here, you know, is just sort of the, you know, identifying the risk of the investment. Like you said, you know, is it even viable to get into EVs or to alternatives or just you know, reducing the emissions of the fuels that you have right now, of the diesel that's in right now. I mean, there's certain particular dynamics that the fleet operators are listening right now are wondering. And I know, you know, in our conversations before, Craig, you had mentioned sort of this being transitional. Like, you know, this is a transitional operation when it comes to building your profile and setting those goals to make sure that, you know, the goals are met and your targets are met. Could you kind of give me the give us an understanding of why this is a transitional operation, and just sort of, you know, give some examples in your answer as well.
Yeah, well, part of it, I'd sort of say it's transitional, Michael's, because there's regulations out there today, like we're seeing coming out of California, other markets that we operate, also introducing regulations. So this thing's coming, and they're doing it for, you know, for important reasons, obviously, because we've got a challenge around you know, the global warming and the impact it's having on the overall environment and the impact on you know, on people and economies around the world. All right, so when we think through that transition, so okay, that's a reality today. So there's obviously research that has to go into, so okay, what does this mean for my operation? But sort of coming back a little bit, it's like saying, what are the things I can control today? So I'm looking at my fuel profile. What drives that? Drivers have a huge impact in performance. So are there things that I can do today with regard to driver behavior to significantly improve? Absolutely there is, and a lot of fleets are doing that today, but there's probably more things that can be done, especially using machine learning and getting more insights into you know, more predictive outcomes. So that's one thing. The other thing too is around route planning. Route planning, so ensuring that we've got you know, the transportation TMS is actually tailored tightly to your operations. And not only that, but forecasting for how's my business going to change in 5 years, in 10 years. So what are your op plans that you're thinking today and where you're spending capital, and also conversations with your shippers and your receivers that, you know, what, because it's going to impact them as well. So regulation is going to be driving it, but the reality is good, positive commercial outcomes. So the TMS is a really important one. There's a lot we can do now with, again, with machine learning, where I can optimize my fleet, look at traffic patterns, look at the load configuration, and then the reality is EVs are heavier, right? So it means my payload profile is going to be different. So what does that mean? It means I really have to think about simulating what is and thinking through the charging network as well. So how do I tailor my business to still fulfill my service level agreements with my shippers and my receivers, as well as ensuring that I am running economically? And the other factor to this is permits take a long time, a long time. And understanding that process requires expertise, right? So who in the organization is talking to the right authority to understand all that? And the final thing I just say is that profile of the aerodynamics. What can I do on my fleet today where I can improve, you know, reduce the friction, for example, on trailers, the biggest part of the asset that probably generates the most amount of friction. It's things like side skirts, or you know, things like fairings on tractors, covers on wheels. Do you have that today? And if not, why not? Because they can save a tremendous amount in fuel, not only on costs, but also, of course, your emission.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of our listeners has a particular question about aerodynamics. You know, you're speaking of trailer aerodynamics. JT Kirtley, you know, he is asking just how important is aerodynamics to sustainability? And piggybacking on that question, Craig, is that a way that a manager could immediately make an impact on that emissions profile versus buying a hydrogen powered truck or an EV?
I know, yeah, absolutely. I know which one's going to be cheaper. And I think the important thing is, yeah, it is, and that's reality. So a lot of these are aftermarket, retros, which would be really important to consider. And again, it comes down to what does your delivery profile look like? What do your routes look like? So, and I would argue, I'd have a strong hypothesis that by introducing factors around aerodynamics, as I said, side skirts, fairings, wheel covers, and so on, it's huge. But the same things as I mentioned before on driver behavior, like training. There are, Smith is a program that helps manage the driver behavior. You get that if you just start with that, as well as elements on aerodynamics. You could be arguing you're looking at between 25 and 30% savings in operational costs, not even thinking about what you can do on maintenance.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That is the sort of underlying thing of all this. And when we were talking about, basically making a cleaner truck, there's definitely the preventive maintenance side of things. And, juxtaposed with the driver practices that you have, just described. Let's get in. Let's kind of get into the driver practices. Let's kind of dig deep into that. And the most important thing I would imagine is optimizing fuel mileage. I mean, I think that's the main goal in that. I mean, is there a particular program or best practices when teaching your drivers these new ways of driving? Because in some cases, saving 10.5% on miles per gallon can save over $8 million for some companies. So where can that be most viable when it comes to training drivers?
Well, there are sort of professional third-party services that provide driver training, which are extremely good and well established. I think the other thing too is we're seeing a lot more instant driver feedback, and that's critical. So with the advancement of forward and driver-facing camera technology, utilizing machine vision, it serves multiple purposes. A big part of it is centered on safety. But another element is if you're combining information from the engine management system, so you're picking up things around, you are picking up data on MPGs, pedal position, speeding. If you've got the posted speed limit as well as you've got other elements of things like road signs and stop signs and things like that, that feedback, all that data can provide really important feedback for the driver. And so whether you introduce a driver scoring system, I think what's really important to be effective in that is you've got to have instant feedback, and it's got to be a positive experience. And I think that the influence you can have on driver by focusing on the driver, driving ideally in what I call the green zone, you can be looking at 25% savings or more. But not only just fuel savings, but of course it flows through to lower maintenance costs, and that's very real. So I think so the great thing is that tech is here today. It's getting better and better and better. It's also getting cheaper to deploy with the changes and improvements in the chipsets right at the edge. So when I talk at the edge, I'm talking about actually inside the cab. So that compute is all happening with the driver. And I believe that companies like ourselves and some of our competitors and partners, they're really focusing on this, and it's looking through a lens of safety, of course, number one. Two is around reducing emissions, reducing maintenance costs. They all flow together, and this technology now is really helping, along with, as I said, the professional third-party programs that help our trucking community today.
Hey, Road Signs listeners. It's your man, Mike Freeze, here to tell you that the call-in lines are open. What does that mean, you may ask? Isn't this a podcast, not a radio show? You're correct, but we found a new way that you can call in and leave myself or my co-host, Seth Clevenger, a message. Leave us a message on new topics you'd like to hear more about or ask questions you may have about the trucking industry. Give us a ring at ttn.ws/speakpipe.
That's one of the things, definitely when it comes to achieving sustainability in that sense. It's definitely a selling point to that it's going to make every aspect of a trucking operation better in the long run. Definitely when it comes to dispersing emissions and the maintenance costs and driver retention, which are all huge problems in the trucking industry. That many insiders and leaders are trying to figure all of this out, and in that sense, even in this workshop, I'm hoping some of the listeners are not getting paralysis by analysis, just kind of thinking of how to plot all of this. We discussed step one, where we are basically, when it comes to fleets, you're managing where you are in the realm of sustainability, and step two is once you have that profile, setting those standards and meeting those targets as a fleet operation to make that happen. It's definitely in lieu of the Carve regulations that are coming out, efforts to make the industry net zero by 2050 in some cases. So there's definitely the roadmap, which you had just explained very thoroughly, Craig. But in that, getting that analysis that paralysis by analysis, and having all that data now, since we have this profile, we can go on to step three, and executing that plan, and adjusting it and continuing to track the progress of that emissions. When we get into this, before we get into this, what are some of the first steps within that third step in executing and continuing to track? We have all this information. How can we put this to good use?
Yep. Yeah, I call that all that information, I call it dark data. So there's a lot of data where it's not being used and it sits right, but it is actually accessible. What I can do is I can give you an example of what we've done from our customers and what we've built is, for all intents and purposes, really important insights. And so we have created what we call a decarb tool, which is really made up of fundamentally AI benchmarking. So we've tried to help fleets get actionable insights, and compare them to other fleets, obviously in a nominalized way. So really, there's really 5 parts to this. The first part is sort of that executive overview, right? So I want to understand what is my sustainability footprint, if you will.
Okay.
And this is going to be really important because fleets are going to, at some point in the future, regulation will require them to report on their footprint, okay? And they want to do that in a scalable way. I see companies like ourselves as in playing a really important role in getting that information, because part of it's the process. How do I get it? Is it information that can be verified and so on? So that overview is critically important. So how am I going in terms of performance? The other part is really just my emissions overview. So that's displaying the CO2 emissions, intensity from the ICE vehicles, and benchmarks against similar fleets. So what we've done is we've used what they call clustering, or K-means clustering, which really takes fleets or vehicles that have this very similar profile to how you operate, and I'm benchmarking against that. And that's really, really important to get that benchmark, which is sort of something we said at the beginning. The other one is really around performance, unproductive idling, okay? And there's a lot of those reports there today. but this is looking at it through a slightly different lens.
Mm-hmm.
And then fuel and energy economy is really, again, it's another metric of fuel, again, centered on my CO2 emissions, along with consumption, distance travel, trending information.
Mm-hmm.
And the final part is probably one of the most important. It's around replacement suitability, okay? And this suitability is saying which vehicles would do profile today as being good candidates for like EVs or potentially even hydrogen, or even some other alternative CNG, LNG mixed, somewhere in that transition phase. And so that replaceability. So these are the tools. These are really important execution tools that I can use to help me, in this, basically take the, benchmarking information, informed decisions, see my profile, implement programs that influence it, track it, and then rinse and repeat.
Okay. This being, you being with EROAD, they provide the service, closely tracking, fuel usage, and idle times that you were just mentioning, and really gathering, critical engine data that helps in reducing cost and as you said, the carbon footprint and, those, how have your customers, used that particular data for maximum optimization? Just kind of, I'll give you a chance to toot your own horn in this case.
Yeah, well, look, to be honest, it's, we've had a lot of this reporting data in the past, like for example, fuel information, safety data, and things like that. But I think in reality, we didn't really have it packaged as well as we could. And so what this has really done for us, is particularly looking through the lens of sustainability, is we're now trying to think of this way more practically. So that's one thing. How can I use the information I have out of my fleet today to make really important operational decisions? And all this is, again, a viable business, managing my cash flow, ensuring that I'm retaining my driver. All these are so many factors to manage, but this one is a big one. So taking the information we have today and repackaging it as we've done with this new sustainability module, what we actually did, and we're fortunate because, and coming from New Zealand, which is a fun fact in New Zealand, is that 80% of New Zealand's power generation is already renewable. 80%. So they've got 15% to 20% to go to have 100% renewable. It's also a market that we use as a proving ground. And so what I mean by that is it's producing things like what we did with our sustainability modules and getting quick feedback and iterating and bring that to other markets here, like in North America. And it's really interesting because the profiles are much the same. It's just on a smaller scale in New Zealand. And so, and our customers there and also here are really trying to, harness this information, make insightful decisions. And the one thing I'm also learning, Michael, is this is not done just by singly in our company. It's actually building a proper ecosystem. So it's working right upstream and downstream. So we have to work closely with the utilities, the people who are doing the power, generation, transmission, and distribution, or the infrastructure that's going to be built. We've got to work closely with those folks and pull information from them, do integrations, and all these important insights we're really, I believe, even though we've been going around for a while, we're only at the beginning, as well as a lot of our customers are in this journey, and it's really important transition.
One of the things, just to kind of round out the step 3, because there's so many. I mean, we can probably talk about this for several hours. So, but one of the things, especially with our listeners, they had asked the question concerning roadblocks when it comes to innovation. And I want to piggyback on that as well. When, most of the listeners here They probably don't have a hydrogen fueled engine truck. They probably don't have an EV, but what they do have is an old diesel. and if you could just in the sense of explaining, any roadblocks ahead when it comes to obtaining sustainability, but also what why does extending the life of the existing vehicle, what makes that more sustainable? I mean, what things can be done for fleets that are in that position right now with the vehicles that they have now? That's something we probably didn't talk about too much, but could you kind of talk about the roadblocks in that particular context?
Sure. Yeah, well, let me sort of just touch on what you can do with your existing vehicles. There's a lot. I think the reality is, if you think of the life cycle of a tractor or a refrigerator trailer or so on, trying to optimize the operation of that vehicle so it can go as far as it can. And then at some point, it's going to be more economically viable to look into an alternative. Part of the challenge, which is the second part of your question, is having the right data to help make insightful decisions. So I would sort of say one of the roadblockers, and I think this will be solved with technology, is actually trying to introduce simulations. Right. So what I mean by that is, so you imagine you've got your operation, and I'm spinning up a digital twin of that operation. And now what I'm going to do is I'm now going to seed into that different vehicle types, right, based on my, how I do my routes today. So I think that is a blocker today, because it's, again, you don't necessarily have those insights, but I think we can solve that, right, quite easily. And companies like Microsoft, Google, AWS, they are so leaning into this and can provide tremendous support. We certainly are working very closely with them as well. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is just understanding what is going to be needed from an infrastructure perspective. So again, what I have to do potentially behind the fence, where my charging corridors, what type of chargers should be looking at, or using third parties. So what does that mean? And again, and also integrating that information into your systems. So understanding what the state of charge is, understanding that, or what should be my charging optimization profile for my fleet. It doesn't have to necessarily be 100%, right? It can be potentially, say, 75, 80%, depending on the distance and the type of routes you're doing. And so, so automating that, and there will be, the charging networks are getting way more smarter. Companies like ours have to integrate with that. Customers need to understand what can they do from a software perspective that influences the hardware in the infrastructure that makes my operation run better, right? So that's a bit of a roadblocker today. It is getting solved, which is great. I think that the other part, I think technologically, is a bit of a roadblock, is really range, right? So that's about the chemistry of the batteries. It's about looking at hydrogen. Is it a source that's coming from a green source, or is it, call it brown, or grey source, which is more fossil fuel? And so the good news is that there's so much R&D, billions and billions of dollars being spent on this by really smart engineers and scientists. And we've seen this come out, and play out. We've seen the range increase dramatically. And I would say, and I would argue certainly by 2030, certainly by 2035, the costs will come down, the range will go up. And so, but big part of the blocker was, if I don't understand, if I'm not actually doing the research or having somebody in my organization focus in on this, or a function in the organization focus in on this, you're going to be left behind. You're going to get to a point where the economics are going to switch the other way quite quickly. And then suddenly I'm not running a very competitive business, or the regulations change and you're way behind, the permitting process, or your shippers are going to say, I'm sorry, you've got to report your emissions, and you're not hitting up the threshold we expect. And the reason why they're doing that is because their stakeholders, right? They're, in a lot of cases, they're coming out publicly where businesses are trying to be net zero by, say, 2040.
Yep.
So yeah, a lot going on. So they're probably the big bloggers. But having said that, existing vehicles, it costs CO2 emissions to produce vehicles. So if you also got to recycle it, you've got to get rid of it, right? That's wastage. So the economics are there. If you can get the most amount out of your vehicles, that's thumbs up to you. That's fantastic.
Hey, trucking pros, are you ready to lead the charge in sustainability? Join us for the exclusive RoadSigns workshop on becoming a greener, more sustainable fleet. Michael Fries is joined by Craig Marris, Chief Sustainability Officer at EROAD, to discuss the latest industry trends, insights, and cutting-edge tech to reduce your carbon footprint. Watch the full video replay now at roadsigns.ttnews.com, and let's pave the road to a sustainable tomorrow.
What you said about just the reduction of cost and the increase in innovation when it comes to technology, Craig, I think when we get to that particular point, I think the floodgates will be open, and the world of alternative fuels and EVs, I think, will be closer to critical mass when we get to that point. That's definitely that'll definitely probably be an inflection point for sure that historians will talk about for some time right now. So we got through with step 3. We covered step 1, which is establishing that profile. Step 2 is planning the benchmarks for that, and step 3 is the basic execution and the tracking of that continuous improvement, which you were just explaining, and just some of the challenges that are ahead in that regard. Right now, we would like to open it up for any audience questions. If you have any, if you are too shy to ask a question, you feel free to reach Kay Zimmerman at ttnews.com. We'll respond to those questions as soon as we get them. But as for right now, do we have any audience questions? Let's see here. But so far, we are blank right now. So I think, Craig, you thoroughly explained sustainability and how to reach down scale with our with our audience. But I do have a question. With the information that we just had, that you just gave us, which is very important and viable for the many listeners here who are handling these particular situations in the industry. Where can one go for to learn more? There's there's shows from the Technology Maintenance Council which touches upon sustainability on the maintenance side, and there's a lot of discussion on the C-suite level when it comes to the management conference and exposition, the MC&E from the American Trucking Associations. But there's also the Advanced Clean Truck exposition, and I know that you've been there, and that really hits the nail on the head when it comes to sustainability when we're talking about alternative fuels. What other shows or the shows I just mentioned that you get value from that our listeners could go to get even more information about this particular topic?
Yeah, I think that the ACT is, I think, a must. I went to it last year. It's the first time I'd been there, and I recall someone told me, said, I think it was about 15,000 people last year. This year, and then the year before was about 13,000. The year before was 5. So it's going up, and now it's been moved from California to Las Vegas. It's getting that big. The thing that I picked up from there is the amount of tech that's out there and how fast this is moving. There's new businesses popping up all over the place. The thing that and a number of those businesses may not necessarily be viable, right? But a lot are. And so, but they're not the same companies that you're used to seeing. These are new players coming into this industry. A lot of them are software-led companies, I should say. But I think that the important part is you've got everyone through the value chain, right from the beginning to the end. And so from the utilities right down to the charging infrastructure, down to other companies like ourselves that are trying to help our customers from a telematics and compliance perspective. You've got it all. Really insightful speakers. So I would say absolutely, I think it's May next year in Las Vegas, absolutely should be going to that. I think the other thing too is there's a lot of great information at EPA, a lot of the Smart Way program. I believe with the expertise can offer a tremendous amount in terms of helping with benchmarking, and so they're probably a couple of good examples. The other thing I would also say is the utilities, companies helping with the infrastructure. They are they're not all the same. Some are better than others, I would say, but certainly they have tremendous resources for carriers and shippers to gain information, gain insights, understand what the process is, what funding can I get, what grants are available, and there's a lot of money that there is available, but how do you get access to that, and so on. So they're probably that's I would certainly be doing. You can do that today.
Okay. Well, we do have some questions. I was looking into the chat, but there was a Q&A, so I do apologize for the people asking questions. Our first question from Marlo Hyant. Marlo is asking, when shippers and brokers are looking to use carriers who have a high sustainability score, what tools can they use to make these selections?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I actually believe some of these tools are yet to be created. We're certainly trying to build these tools, and a big part of it is understanding, improving what your emission profile is, right? They're going to want to know. And one carrier over another performing similar services that actually have the ability to report it. And not only that, but it becomes a critical part of your the value you're trying to bring to the table around reducing your footprint in a sustainable way, and also those 5 things I mentioned at the beginning around what sustainability is. I think that's going to be super important, right? So I believe we're still at the infancy of that, right? And we're going to have to do it for regulation, right? For reporting for regulations. We certainly have to do that in other countries. The SEC is seriously looking at companies over a certain value that will have to start reporting their climate risks as related to their operations, both physical and transitional, as well as their financial risks as a result of climate change.
Okay.
So they're going to need the data. Data is going to be critical.
Most definitely. It seems that any issue, especially when you're talking about technology and you're talking about the sustainability, of course, it's always about the data, and that seems to be the magic bullet that not often shoots straight when it comes to data, because it's often the beauty of the beholder when it comes to that, because the data can tell you certainly what you want to hear, but it's I will say maybe a cumbersome and time-consuming process of learning what data is good and what data is not so viable. So I mean, it's definitely definitely a task at hand. Marlo has another question. When shippers ask fleets to report their emissions, what all do you expect for them to ask within those reports?
One of them will be actually the size of the emissions and the intensity over time. I think will be one, and also probably by class of vehicle. I think the other thing will be there'll be questions around the risk profile. In other words, have you identified risks? I'm talking physical risks. That's when a large climatic event happens. How you get up to manage that? How have you adapted your operations to ensure you've got resiliency around that? And it's not easy, but you've got to identify what those risks are. So what was the process you've gone through and proven to me that you've thought about this and you have mitigation plans in place? So that, I think, understanding the physical, and then there'll be elements of that transitional risk over time. So it's whether it be regulations are coming in place, and then there's a point of enforcement, then proving that you are within the bounds, the legal bounds of those regulations, will be super important. And so it'll be, what is the process you've gone through to get that information? What is the source of that data? A lot of the source, fortunately, now we can get right from the ECM or from the engine management from the vehicle or the state of charge in an EV, or so really coming from the vehicle itself at the edge, which is awesome, right? So it's a good start. But then there'll be other elements of your footprint about your warehouse and your other operations to support your business. And they're getting into points where they call scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Scope 1 is your direct emissions, reporting on that. And then the other ones really are your indirect, what they call upstream and downstream. And so of your operations. And I trust me, we're going through this process right now because we're an EROAD, because we're publicly traded, and we have to do this because we're a dual listed company. We're having to work through our risk profile under 3 different climatic situations: a 1.5 degree increase, a 3.5, which is the other end of the spectrum, and 1.5 is obviously aligned to the Paris Climate Accord, and then something in between. And so, as we're going through, what are those risks? Where do we get the data? How do we prove that data is credible? Auditing through third parties, it's a lot, and trust me, it takes money as well. So this is a big deal. This is a really big deal. The budgets will have to be set aside for reporting on climate change.
Craig, this is very helpful information for our listeners. It's nice to, when we have when we have a road shop and everyone's hanging on to every word. I'm looking at the attendees list, and not too many people are dropping off. So that's always a good sign. But one of the things that doing the time that we have right now, it's we're done with the questions. But Craig, I definitely would love to invite you in 2024 to a future episode of RoadSigns so we can continue this conversation about sustainability. This is great information, and I want to pick your brain on some other aspects of sustainability that I think we can cover very nicely in our future episodes. So we would love to have you on.
Well, really appreciate the opportunity to come on. As I said, I think sustainability touches every part of the organization, and your stakeholders, both internally and externally. So it's not just around about climate change. It's a lot more than that. That's what I've learned,
yes.
Especially in this new role. It's just the beginning. It really is. It's fascinating. It's a big problem to solve as well.
Yes, and there's lots of tentacles of concern when it comes to sustainability.
That is true. That is true.
That is true.
Pleasure being on. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd love to come back anytime.
No problem. We've been speaking with Craig Marris. Thank you very much for this special RoadSigns workshop, how to be a sustainable trucking fleet. Thank you, Craig, for being on.
My pleasure.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.
Before we close, let's take a moment to revisit the previous question in our conversation with Craig Marris: how to become a sustainable trucking business. As with the RoadSigns workshops, it's a simple question with an array of complex answers that go in several directions. As Craig noted, the path of sustainability should be carefully calculated from start to finish. Every fleet is different. There is not a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to going green. With the CARB regulations for California starting in January, the race for sustainability is moving into high gear. Marris noted that the first step is to establish where your fleet is at when it comes to emissions. Second, managers should plan and tweak its sustainability path. And the third step, quite frankly, is to execute. It's a brave new world out there, and sustainability is becoming the new normal for a greener industry. If you enjoyed this episode of RoadSigns, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Feel free to reach out to the RoadSigns team on X at TT RoadSigns or reach me at Michael V. Fries. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And also, let us know how we're doing by texting TT Survey to 571-622-0001. And of course, we'll be back soon with a new episode of Road Signs. Until then, I'm Michael Fries. Thank you for listening.